Welcome back to Enigmatic Echoez, the podcast where myths, legends, folklore, and unexplained mysteries come alive through the stories that refuse to be forgotten. I'm your host, Jazz. Have you ever noticed how every state seems to have that one place locals tell you not to visit? Not because it's dangerous, not because you'll get arrested, but because something about it just feels wrong. For Connecticut, that place is Dudleytown. And honestly, if I found myself walking through a forest called Dark Entry, I'd probably turn around immediately. Because if somebody names a road Dark Entry, that sounds less like directions and more like a warning label. Tonight, we're exploring one of America's most infamous ghost settlements, a place surrounded by stories of curses, disappearances, madness, and encounters that still leave visitors uneasy decades later. But here's the twist. There are really two stories of Dudleytown. One is history, the other is legend. And by the end of tonight's episode, you can decide which one is more frightening. So dim the lights, settle in, and let's take a walk into the forest. Before we dive into the hauntings, curses, and whispered stories, we need to talk about something strange. Dudleytown wasn't actually a town, at least not officially. That's one of the first misconceptions surrounding the legend. Dudleytown was a small settlement located within Cornwall, Connecticut. Now, the settlements began developing during the early to mid-1700s when several families established homes in a remote valley surrounded by steep hills and thick forests. By the 1740s, members of several families, including the Dudleys, had settled in the area, attempting to build lives in one of the more isolated corners of colonial Connecticut. Now, today when people hear ghost town, they imagine empty streets, abandoned storefronts, and rows of decaying buildings. Dudleytown was never that. It was a small farming community, a handful of homes, a few families, a difficult place to survive. The valley itself presented challenges. The rocky soil wasn't ideal for farming. The surrounding hills limited sunlight. Winters were harsh. Life required constant work. Yet despite those obstacles, families attempted to build lives there. For decades, they succeeded. Children were born. Neighbors helped one another. The settlement wasn't cursed. It was simply isolated. But isolation has a funny way of creating stories. And eventually those stories would become far larger than the settlement itself. Now, if you search Dudleytown today, you'll almost immediately encounter one reoccurring claim, the curse of the Dudleys. According to folklore, the Dudley family carried a curse from England. The story often traces its roots back to Edmund Dudley. Edmund Dudley was a real historical figure who was executed in England in 1510. According to the legend, his execution unleashed a curse upon his bloodline. Generations later, descendants supposedly carried that curse across the Atlantic. Eventually, it found its way to Connecticut. And finally, Dudleytown. It's a compelling story. The problem is that there is no verified evidence connecting the settlers of Dudleytown to the famous English Dudley family often mentioned in the legend. Most historians considered the cursed story folklore rather than documented history, but folklore has never needed evidence to survive. Only a good story, and Dudleytown had plenty of those. Over time, isolated tragedies became connected in people's minds. A death here, a hardship there, a family misfortune. Each event became another piece of the growing puzzle. Eventually, people stopped seeing individual tragedies. They started seeing a pattern. And once people believe a place is cursed, every bad thing that happens becomes proof. One thing almost everyone agrees on is this: Dudleytown feels strange. Not necessarily supernatural, just strange. The settlement sits within an area known as Dark Entry Forest. The surrounding hills create a long shadow. Sunlight disappears early. The woods feel enclosed. Visitors often describe the valley as oppressive, as if the forest itself is pressing inward. Imagine standing among towering trees. No traffic, no city noise, no nearby homes, just silence. Real silence. the kind modern life rarely allows. For some people, that's peaceful. For others, it's unsettling. And according to countless stories, Dudleytown falls firmly into this unsettling category. Visitors frequently describe feeling watched. Others report sudden anxiety. Some claim they experience overwhelming dread without an obvious cause. Whether that's paranormal or psychological remains open to interpretation, but it certainly helps explain why legends thrive here. Now, this is where history begins stepping aside and folklore takes center stage. Over the decades, visitors began reporting unusual experiences. These stories are personal accounts and local legends, not verified events, but they're part of what made Dudleytown famous. One recurring story involves whispers. People claim they've heard voices when nobody else was nearby. Some describe hearing their names called. Others report hearing conversations somewhere beyond the trees. The strange part, the voices allegedly disappear whenever someone investigates. Several visitors have described hearing footsteps following them through the woods. When they stop walking, the footsteps stop too. When they continue, the footsteps return. No person, no animal, just the sound. Imagine hearing that miles from your vehicle at night. Suddenly, every tree starts looking suspicious, and every shadow begins looking a little too human. Among the most common reports are sightings of shadow figures, dark human-shaped silhouettes seen between the trees. Witnesses often describe them the same way. They're distant, motionless, watching, then gone. No dramatic chase, no attack, no glowing eyes, just the unsettling feeling that someone was standing there a moment ago. One visitor claimed they spotted a figure standing between two trees, about 50 yards away. Thinking it was another hiker, they called out. No response. When they blinked, the figure was gone. Another story tells of a group repeatedly noticing a dark shape moving alongside them through the woods. Every time they stopped to look directly at it, nothing was there. The experiences are impossible to verify, yet the consistency of the descriptions has helped keep the legend alive. Now, many haunted locations eventually acquire their own ghostly residents. Dudleytown is no exception. One legend speaks of a woman in white wandering the forest. Descriptions vary depending on who's telling the story. Some say she's searching for lost family members. Others believe she's connected to one of the tragedies associated with the settlement. Witnesses describe seeing a pale figure standing among the trees, sometimes near old stone foundations, sometimes near trails, sometimes appearing for only a few seconds before vanishing. There is no historical evidence supporting the story, but folklore isn't concerned with documentation, it's concerned with atmosphere. And few images are more haunting than a lone figure standing silently in a dark forest. For much of its history, Dudleytown was primarily a local story. That changed dramatically during 1970. According to numerous accounts, paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren became interested in the stories surrounding the settlement and helped bring wider attention to the location. The Warrens reportedly described Dudleytown as a place with demonic possessions, and their interest helped introduce the legend to a much larger audience. Whether one agrees with the Warrens' conclusions or not, their involvement is often cited as one of the major reasons Dudleytown transformed from a regional ghost story into a nationally recognized paranormal destination. As word spread, ghost hunters, paranormal enthusiasts, and curious thrill seekers began arriving in increasing numbers. Some hoped to document evidence, others simply wanted to experience the atmosphere for themselves. By the 1980s and 1990s, Dudleytown had become one of the most discussed allegedly haunted locations in New England. Some visitors reported unusual recordings, others claimed cameras malfunctioned unexpectedly. Several described feeling overwhelming discomfort during investigations. There were stories of batteries draining, compasses behaving strangely, equipment refusing to work. Whether these events were paranormal or simply environmental is impossible to determine, but every report added another layer to the legend. Soon, Dudleytown wasn't just a local ghost story, it had become a national one. Here's the part many people overlook though. The most fascinating story might not be the curse, or the ghosts, or the shadow figures. It might be the way legends evolve. Dudleytown experienced hardships. Like many isolated settlements, families struggled, people died, residents eventually left in search of better opportunities elsewhere. That's not unusual. It happens throughout New England, but most abandoned settlements fade into obscurity. Dudleytown didn't. Why? Because people kept telling stories, and each generation added something new. A curse, a ghost, a shadow, a whisper, a haunting. Over time, the legend became larger than the truth, and in some ways, that's exactly how folklore works. Today, Dudleytown sits on a private property. The land is closed to the public. Years of trespassing, vandalism, and unauthorized investigations led property owners to restrict access. So if you're listening and suddenly thinking about planning a midnight road trip, don't. The ghosts aren't what will get you. The trespassing charge might. What's left today are fragments, stone foundations, scattered remnants of the past, and legends that refuses to disappear. The forest remains, the stories remain, and depending on who you ask, something else remains too. So, what is Dudleytown? A cursed settlement? A haunted forest? A collection of misunderstood tragedies? Or simply one of the most successful legends ever attached to an abandoned place? Maybe it's all of them. Maybe it's none. Personally, I think the most unsettling possibility is that nothing supernatural happened at all. Because if ordinary events can grow into a legend this powerful, imagine what other stories we've accepted without question. And maybe that's the real mystery. Thank you for joining me tonight on Enigmatic Echoez. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow, subscribe, and share the podcast with someone who loves myths, legends, folklore, and unexplained mysteries. You can also find Enigmatic Echoez on Instagram for updates, episode announcements, and additional content, and on YouTube for visuals that accompany each episode. Until next time, stay curious, stay cautious, and remember, if a place is called Dark Entry Forest, maybe don't be the person who says, "What could possibly go wrong?" Because famous last words have to start somewhere. Good night.